Hi, I'm Dr. Joseph Sansone. I'm a psychotherapist opposed to psychopathic authoritarianism. This is Mind Matters and everything else. My website's josephsansone.com. I have with us today Dr. Mark Trozzi. Is it Trozzi or Trozzi?
You can
I
say
always
either.
say
We tend to
Trozzi.
say Trozzi, but Trozzi is probably more correct historically.
Oh, see, that's actually what I normally say. Okay, so I'm not doing bad. Trozzi, Trozzi, I heard it both ways. Now I'm just going to be calling you both names through the whole interview. You have been an emergency room physician for like 27 years. You're a not just a medical doctor, but you're a professor. You've taught medicine at medical colleges. And underneath this video, I'm going to have your long CV and everything on there. And you became pretty much targeted by the powers that be up there in People's Republic of Canada when you tried to continue practicing medicine during COVID. You want to just start there and tell us how that kind of
Yeah,
evolved?
sure. So
And
it's
before
so
we get, wait,
yeah.
sorry, it's drtrozzi.news.
Yes, sir.
And yep. And you
drtrozzi.news.
got any other websites or anything you want to give out?
On X, you can follow me at Dr. Trozzi, Substack, Dr. Trozzi.
Perfect. All right, my friend. So what happens?
Yeah, as you mentioned, I'd been practicing emergency medicine for 27 years when COVID was launched. And I had been teaching in three medical schools over those years. I was an active instructor of advanced trauma life support with the American College of Surgeons, teaching at multiple centers. And really, I had a very problem-free career. I lived in a rural area. I specialized really in rural emergency, which meant I would often be the only doctor for 100 miles in any direction to deal with anything from trauma to a woman in labor in the middle of the night, all those sort of things. So, a very excellent career, very popular with the patients.
Just a quickie question on that, Doc. So
Yeah.
you didn't just besides being an ER doctor, you kind of had to go a little bit further because there was no one around. If you had some specialty issue, there's no one around to deal with it. A lot of times people want to live. You'd have to know that, right? So you had a little more
Yes.
broad knowledge because of that.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was really kind of my fascination in medicine was to be and to continue to evolve into that. If you could only have one doctor, this guy'd be a great guy to have around. And I started in city hospitals, and then I gradually worked to smaller city hospitals, and then to rural, and so that was kind of the progression of my career, both because of my interest of how what I was interested in medicine, and because of my love of nature and love of the outdoors. And so that stimulated a very strong interest in critical resuscitation. So I taught critical resuscitation in different platforms, including trauma medicine, which I taught to physicians from really all around the world that would travel to Sunnybrook and other centers where I taught. So that was my life up until COVID. Then came COVID, and I was the proverbial frontline doctor, of course. And so what I noticed immediately was that at the same moment that the world was being told, including the people in my town, were being told that were thousands and thousands of cases of COVID, and people were sick with the COVID and dying of COVID, and the hospitals were overloaded. What I actually realized and what I saw immediately was that for the first time in 27 years, there was absolutely zero work in the hospital. Not a quiet day, zero. I literally had 14-hour shifts with zero patients while people were standing across the street, so holding signs in the snow. We love you, doctors. Thank you for the sacrifices you're making. And honestly, even a lot of the good physicians were kind of running around caught up in the whole psychological operation of fear. And even though we were literally sitting on our hands, they were kind of panicking over the pandemic that clearly wasn't happening where we were. Now, so my approach to that wasn't that I immediately suspected something was strange. I just said, well, I guess it's not here yet. And so, anticipating the arrival of a new coronavirus, I dove into research so I'd be prepared for it. And I discovered very quickly that there were some very good treatments that you could use for COVID, zinc and hydroxychloroquine. Later we'd learn about ivermectin. And what I noticed fairly early on is when I bring these things forward, they were kind of squashed rather quickly. It was like there was pre-structured narratives to say, no, it doesn't work.
And that's not
And then, of course,
normal.
What's
that's
that?
not normal in medicine. Like medicine is more exploratory, right? Hey, maybe this will work, that kind of thing, right?
Oh, 100%. In fact, one of my colleagues, and I was a teacher of trauma medicine, but one of my colleagues would have rigorous debates with me about basic principles of trauma medicine. And there was no punishment for that. I
Hmm.
mean, he would entertain some ideas that were very outside of what were really accepted standards. And even though I disagreed with him, we just had healthy debates about these things like,
Exactly.
fluid resuscitation, things like that. But that very same colleague, when I came to him, well into 2020, and I said, none of this makes sense from the masks to a lot of what's going on. And what he said to me, I'll never forget. He said, Mark, it is not our job to question public health. And that's when a red light went off because, of course, it's my job to question public health
You're a
because,
doctor.
yeah, I don't have a Hippocratic oath to public health. I have a Hippocratic oath to every single individual patient that I care for. So, so the year became gradually bizarre in terms of I kept studying the real science and I kept learning. And I noticed my colleagues and the public was just basically playing this kind of sick game of Simple Simon Says with the changing mandates and 2 masks and 6 feet and 5 feet and treatments don't work and all this nonsense. But I was in an empty hospital with an excellent computer system and access to a library. So I studied hundreds, probably thousands of hours in 2020. And I learned a lot about COVID. And it was very clear to me that what was happening was by no means following science. What was happening was clearly an imposed agenda with other motives. Uh, now, so that was kind of an uncomfortable year. As much as I didn't have to do much work, I just did research, but I gradually found myself a little isolated at work where the other doctors were looking at me sideways. But I wasn't in any trouble. And by the way, I never went along with any of it in terms of lying to the patients or presenting this agenda. And in the fall of 2020, in my ongoing research, I got my first copies of the emergency use authorization applications of Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca to medical regulators like the FDA and like the Public Health Agency of Canada. And when I
Was
read
this,
those,
Dr. Trozzi, was this like in November of 21, we're talking when the Canadian Physicians and Transparency Group got all those records from Pfizer? Is that what we're talking about? Or
no, this is even earlier. I think this is as early as October. I just kind of went
okay,
out of my way and said, let me get the applications that they used to apply
gotcha.
for emergency. So I got the earliest documents you could get with some details. And the first thing I read was the ingredients. And the ingredients were not the ingredients of a vaccine. That was very blatant. A vaccine is a few hundred or a few thousand particles of the thing you're vaccinated against. So it could be like attenuated virus, a couple thousand copies of the virus damaged or modified so it can't cause infection. But what was in these things was these infinite tissue penetrating lipid nanoparticles, which I looked up, I could study and I could say, wow, these were used to like get drugs into the brain and experimental cancer treatments and things like these are a infinite tissue penetrating vehicle. And what was inside them? Now, what was inside them turned out to be worse than the ingredients that I got. But the ingredients were also telling some truth. And what was in there was modified messenger RNA to deliver the genetic code to cause these human cells everywhere in the body to actually manufacture the most toxic part of the coronavirus, the spike protein. At that point, Joseph, a red light went off in my head, and I said, I have an absolute duty to warn everyone I can. And it was already obvious that the doctors were all being muzzled. The political financial pressure to just go along with the agenda was tremendous. So believe it or not, Joseph, I literally resigned all my jobs with no charges. There was nothing against me. I literally resigned from my hospitals because I didn't want to burn any bridges, but I had a duty, which was to warn the public. So I
Mhm.
resigned from my hospitals. I said, I'm taking a 6 month sabbatical to do human rights work. I told the college the same thing. And then I actually sold our house because I knew that they were going to financially imprison doctors to go along with this. So I sold our house to pay off any debts I had. And then on a very lean budget, living very streamlined with a small team. I went on a mission. The first video I published was "This is not a vaccine." I went to Rebel News. I explained treatments for COVID. I explained how the PCR test was being abused. And from there, I just launched a mission to inform the public, which I've been on ever since that day until now. Now, the College of Physicians and Surgeons, with no patient complaint, because I haven't even been working in a hospital during this time. I've been literally just doing public education and research. They still launched an investigation into me. And this was because there was a point in the story. I'm not the only Canadian heroic doctor. There was a point in the story like Dr. Killian, Dr. Francis Christian, Dr. Stephen Maltos, Dr. Roger Hawkinson, Dr. Paul
Sure.
Alexander, Dr. Patrick Phillips, etc. There was a group of us, a core group of us. You know, when you guys had the Barrington Declaration, when you had the Barrington Declaration, we published Canadian Physicians for Science Declaration. And some of us looked at this issue because people were being told that they had to have an injection to keep their job, to feed their kids, to play hockey or whatever it was, which of course you and I know is a complete violation of
Yeah.
Nuremberg Code-based international, federal, provincial, state.
Anybody in the medical or even the mental health field that took any ethics class of any kind knows that that's completely unethical. It's not even like
Yeah,
it's yeah. That is
yeah.
the fact that it's being institutionalized is still baffling.
Oh, it was bizarre because what we found ourselves in a situation where the colleges of physicians and surgeons were actually mandating that doctors must commit medical assault on their patients, and any doctor who refused or who stood against it, they abused their administrative power to revoke our medical licenses and destroy our pre-existing careers.
Mm.
So, um,
So did they go after your medical license even though you weren't practicing? You were just doing public
yeah,
like
well, so yeah, so what happened was that group of doctors I was talking about, we were in regular meetings because we felt we had a moral responsibility. And by the way, all those doctors lost their license or had their license suspended and retired in one variety of a way. We're still like some super talent in Canada waiting to be picked up by somebody else. But in any event, we looked at this issue where people were desperately looking for an exemption note. They go, I do not want to inject this into myself or my wife or my child, but I also want us to keep our house and eat. And or my kid wants to go to university or whatever it is. And so they were desperately looking for exemptions. Now the college was publishing in their communications to doctors, basically, you will not give them exemptions. Again, this is completely unlawful abuse of power. And they were saying you'll not give them exemptions. So we argued, well, people, you can write your own exemption because if you don't want a medical procedure, it's against the law to give it to you. If you're being coerced, it's against the law. Like if someone comes and says, I want an abortion because my boyfriend will beat me up, it's against the law for me to help them get that abortion because they're coerced. But that wasn't enough. People didn't have the ability to stand on their own feet like that. So we then looked at, said, well, what should an exemption from a doctor look like? And so I wrote about 20 or 25 as we went into this process. And basically, my exemption said essentially this person does not want this injection.
so
Therefore, it
this
is a
was a
criminal.
template. You put out
Yeah, this was,
templates for yeah,
well,
okay.
no, I actually, together we worked on this and I signed exemptions for a number of people.
Gotcha.
And I said, this person does not want this injection. Therefore, it is medical assault and against the law for me or anyone to give it to them. Well, anyways, the college who clearly have demonstrated that they're minions of big pharma and this globalist agenda, they went right after that. So they started an investigation, 19 investigators. And when I found this out, and imagine I'm working very hard, harder than I ever worked in my life at this time, trying to alert and warn the public and save as many lives from
Not
these
getting
deadly
paid, but you're
injections.
working hard.
Now, I'm not getting paid. But I'm working like a dog, and it's costing me my life savings to do it. And in the middle of this, I find out the college has 19 investigators investigating me. And honestly, the first thought I had was, well, that's great. Because if they investigate me, they're going to research all the science and all the studies and everything I'm publishing, and they're going to find out that I'm right. And they're going to call me up, not to persecute me, but to say, oh my God, a terrible mistake's been made. Help us fix it. So that was what I hoped would happen. And partly I hoped that also because I didn't want to be distracted from saving lives and being part of this active war for the world like you are, Joseph, by being caught up in legally trying to protect my own little license. It's just
Mm.
normally that'd be a normal priority, but in the context of war, it isn't. So I just kept going and publishing. And then they started attacking other doctors. They stripped Patrick Phillips of his license, and he was like one of our best early heroes and everything. And so I became a critic of them as well. So I would publish, oh, look what they're doing to Dr. Phillips, and yet look at what a hero he is and how wrong they are, and things like that. Then in the fall of the next year, my friend and lawyer Michael Alexander, who's another real Canadian hero of the COVID war, he reached out and said they've shut down Dr. Crystal Luchke's practice, and her crimes included things like she wouldn't commit fraud on death certificates and claimed that stage 4 cancer was COVID to help jack up their data to coerce the public into forced injections. So she was a hero too. He said, "You still have your license active, even though it's got restrictions. Could you try to save her practice, go work in her practice?" Because her patients, one has already committed suicide, and she had really high need patients. And I said at the time, "Well, Michael, I am so busy fighting this war. I'm helping run the World Council for Health and all the initiatives we're doing. But I said I could do it part time. Let's reach out to Dr. Chris Shoemaker, who was another hero, a Canadian doctor who's was
Yes, I've
also
met him.
under
Yeah.
investigation. But so he and I actually went to Barrie. I moved into the basement of a nurse's home. They were kind enough. And he and I decided we'd split the care of Dr. Litchke's patients while we both continued our activism to protect the public. However, the first day I went in to that clinic and I had to notify the college. I had to tell them I'm returning to practice. Remember, I told them I was suspending practice. It'd be early 2021. I'm returning to practice at this address on this day. And they know, wait a minute, you're trying to save the practice of a doctor that we're crushing, you know? Um, and so I went into that practice, and two very interesting things happened that day. The first thing I would say is almost a spiritual reality, because what I observed supported all my concerns, but it was beyond statistical norms. The first four patients I saw, between the four of them, they'd all been injected with the genetic poison while their doctor had been suspended and couldn't protect them. They'd all been injected with it. And in four patients, I saw more than six major adverse events. And by that, I mean a new brain cancer, a new lung cancer, blood clots in the lungs, extensive blood clots in the legs, Bell's palsy, multiple had a hemorrhagic rash that we were seeing early in the injection campaign. So, I mean, the writing was so powerful. Mark, you've been completely right. These shots are super toxic. And I didn't need that experience to know that. We knew that already. And the other interesting thing that happened that day is the college immediately suspended my license. It was like, no, you're not saving this, doctors. And honestly, within a few days, I went into the practice, and poor Dr. Luchke, a young doctor, was there watching all the equipment being carried out as the practice she'd established was destroyed because of her stand for the public. So, meanwhile, I just continued the mission because, again, I don't need a medical license to warn people and to be an activist. And I set down my income to do this mission, knowing that this kind of thing would happen. So they continued their investigation and their prosecution, and eventually we had a tribunal, and the tribunal was a complete kangaroo charade. But we said we have to go through this tribunal, and then we'll take the record and appeal it to the court. We appealed it to the Ontario courts. And I'll tell you this, before the hearing even happened, a judge visited me in complete discretion and said, "Mark, I respect what you're doing." And of course, he hadn't had his family injected because he had the warning from people like me. But he said, "But none of you guys are going to win your cases in the courts." So I said, "Well, I'm going to have to continue the test." And to me, it became more of a test, not of the realities of ethics or science. It became a test of the legal system. Is the legal system still legitimate, or is it just an accomplice in mass murder? So I went into the Ontario courts, and believe it or not, like we had all the facts of law, all the facts of human rights, all the science on our side. They basically declared they don't even have to look at the science. It's just true because the government says so. And the court rubber stamped the kangaroo tribunal's decision to revoke my license. And for me, that was just really what that was I was then able to report to the people of Canada to say, listen, I've tested the court system for a pulse. It is dead. We're going to have to figure out another way forward. And I just continue. I'm very busy. It's a mission, and it's
Is it
definitely,
safe? Is Dr.
safe.
Trozzi, is it safe for you in Canada? Like, is the Canadian government doing anything to these doctors, like physically or any, like, are they arresting them or are they, I mean, and I mean this totally seriously because I speak to some mutual friends in Canada that we have, and the authoritarianism that I'm hearing being described on multiple levels is something that maybe when we were kids we would heard about in East Germany. Like it's
Yeah,
approaching those levels. And
yeah.
is it safe for doctors that are speaking out physically from the Canadian government right now?
No, I don't think it's safe, and for a couple of reasons. One is that so the first thing they do is destroy the doctor or nurse financially.
Mhm.
And you'd be amazed, I'm not the only one, how many nurses and doctors have actually lost their homes. But to me, at the same time, they've passed a trial by fire. These are the most incredible doctors and nurses we have. I mean, ones that'll do the right thing no matter what are amazing.
Yeah,
But the other side of it is, I'll be honest, the people aren't buying it. I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, injected and spiked and like completely brainwashed by TV. I
right.
don't see much of those people. When I walk down the street, even in a city that I haven't been in, anywhere in the country, I have people run up to me and hug me and thank me for saving them and their family. So my career is going very good if saving lives is what it's all about.
Right.
But here's the thing that makes it scary as well is they are passing laws in Canada, and there's a group of three laws all set to pass basically by or around Christmas, which is very soon. And these laws include things like the Canadian government main like claims the right to prosecute a Canadian citizen anywhere in the world for things they say that could be interpreted as hate speech, which I mean, hate speech can be as simple as saying, "Hey, that's not a vaccine. They lied to you."
And I went
So
through
we're
that
we're in
bill. I
danger.
went through that bill with lawyer Lisa Marone, and the way she's interpreted it, she's saying like literally Christianity is considered hate speech. And
Yes.
the way that law is written, and so that's really kind of amazing. But sorry, please
Yeah.
continue.
Yeah, no, no problem. So I mean, here we are both on Turtle Island, and you're in the south part of Turtle Island, and you're in Florida, and Florida, for all its imperfections, is sort of like is the leader in the restoration, it would appear, of ethics and science and medical rights and all this. And I know you're there and you're pushing the
Yeah.
envelope, so you're like, it ain't good enough. But
Yeah,
I'm
no,
Canada,
I mean, it's relative, you know what I mean? Compared to
yeah,
New Jersey or Canada, we might
yeah.
be, in a better place, but it's not good here. The stuff that it's just slow rolling the same program. And
Oh.
but what I say to my Canadian friends is dual citizenship.
Well, I think we've been taught. I mean, I've talked with some of the other medical doctors about this who are in the situation, some of our other heroes. And if you look at the Canadian government's claim right now that we can arrest and prosecute a Canadian citizen anywhere in the world for stuff they say. I mean, I think we may need to go a step further, which is we may need to look at not only getting other citizenships, but then actually having to denounce our Canadian citizenship so the
Right.
Canadian corporation doesn't claim these rights. So, I
Right.
mean,
I mean,
we're,
that's a problematic approach, though, because the other countries would have to allow them to violate their jurisdiction to go ahead and get you, you know?
yeah, well,
And,
look at what happened to Dr. Fulmich
yeah, I mean,
in
he was kidnapped. He was
he
kidnapped.
was
There's no doubt
kidnapped
about that.
by
Yeah.
the German government and
Yeah.
locked up. So I think we face the same problems. But again,
What about
right
life?
now,
Like,
uh-huh.
what about life? Like, is the Canadian government in a position where you think they would just kidnap someone and take them out if they were too vocal on this issue, if they were getting too much ground?
Well, my impression of the current management of the Corporation of Canada is that their recent crimes include fraud, racketeering, mass medical assault, mass murder, covering up
Mhm.
the evidence of the murders. So yeah, for sure, I don't think these people are beyond
Right.
hunting down Dr. Macus or Dr. Trozzi or Dr. Hoff. Not at all. We're dealing with mass murderers here. These are very serious. I mean, you know it. You've been pointing out the fact that, hey, this isn't not only is this not a vaccine, this is a biological weapon, and
Right.
they're the ones administering it.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Crazy.
It truly is. So, continue with your narrative. Sorry to throw you off.
Oh no, I just recognize, in response to your question, that I think the nurses, doctors, scientists, and others, even lawyers. I mean, lawyers are under attack. Their licenses are under attack if they've stood against the COVID crime spree. So I think that, yeah, I think there's very real danger. I mean, it takes a certain spiritual foundation to do the right thing no matter what. And that's one of the beautiful things about the people I've come to know in the last 5 years, like you. We wouldn't have become friends if it wasn't for this, is you've brought together healthcare people and others who have a moral backbone which is stronger than their fear of retaliation.
Yeah, and I guess that, when you talk about integrity, like if you think of a building being structurally sound, it all kind of meshes up. And it's like sometimes people are like consciously here, subconsciously here, they're all kind of confused. But like on something like this, you should have a core, like recognizing the evil nature of what's going on. You know what I mean? Because it's like, people of all races, religions, all backgrounds have been targeted here, political affiliate, this is basically a question of whether our species will exist or not is a legitimate question right now because of what they've done to the DNA and that kind of thing. Speak to that a little bit. Like, what do you know about that on the potential? I know a recent study came out
Well,
showing in fact, I use this in my case that 50% of the unvaccinated women had the MRA in their blood and placenta, right? That's frightening right there for the
oh yeah,
shedding
there's
and the multi-generational.
yeah, I mean, this genetic bioweapon is really a biological bull in a china shop. I mean, it does so many damage. And I mean, I've given lectures. We were together last January. I gave a lecture in Florida on the mechanisms of injury, and the reality is you can't keep up. I mean, we know 28 mechanisms by which it causes cancer alone.
Wow.
But, and this is I mean, it was shocking from the moment we looked at the ingredients before anyone was injected. Shocking enough to like basically set down my entire life's work to try to stop it. That's not because I'm super courage. That's how serious this is. But you they're genetically modifying people, claiming they're giving them a vaccine and then genetically modifying them so that they will produce a variety of poisons, mostly the spike protein of the man-made designed SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the most toxic part of it. And normally nobody's body would be producing it. And then they're producing this random splay of protein junk, which can trigger autoimmune diseases in every direction. And so but then what's worse is, they claimed that what was in it was modified messenger RNA, modified both so that it would screw up and create all these random proteins as well as a spike protein, but modified so that it would persist. And nobody knew how long. In other words, oh, so my body is going to start producing foreign proteins and identifying itself as a foreigner to be attacked by my own immune system. But for how long? Well, nobody knows because this is completely experimental, this new N1 methyl pseudouridinated version of messenger RNA. But as you know, and as Dr. Speaker, Dr. Kernan, and others have revealed through repeated analysis around the world, 30% of the genetic material in there is DNA. And it includes plasmid DNA. And it includes, in the case of Pfizer, completely covered up that it could even possibly be there in the fraud they committed to the FDA and the Public Health Agency, European Agency, et cetera, that they put in these genetic sequences which were derived from the simian virus, not the virus, but some specific genetic sequences, which we've known since 1990 research. These are genetic hacking tools. When you put foreign DNA with something like a pegylated nanoparticle into a human cell or any mammal cell, and if you deliver as well these little SV40 promoter enhancer sequences, then what that does, I mean, and this is pre-existing research, that will cause the DNA to be moved into the nucleus and cause it to be incorporated. So you're permanently genetically modifying and damaging the genetic code of the humans. And we have evidence of this now, Joseph. Some of the most shocking evidence. And I think what you've pointed out is really important. This is not just an attack on the people health that are alive right now. This is an attack on our possibility to produce viable offspring and have the continuation of the human race. We now have tests on male sperm cells where the sperm cells contain in their DNA the genetic code of the spike protein. So men's sperm has been genetically modified so they will pass this toxic genetic flaw into their children if they're able to reproduce. Every sperm cell, we don't know. We don't know how many, but many. We have evidence that 30% of a woman's eggs die shortly following the injections as a result of these injections assault on the ovaries where they're particularly drawn to go and deposit the genetic code. We have cancers that have now been taken out of people. And when you look at the DNA in the cells of the cancer, that DNA has been modified by these injections. So you're looking at permanent genetic modification of human beings without their consent based on a lie that they're getting a safe and effective vaccine for a disease, claiming there's no treatment for which there was good treatments. And the whole thing from the virus through to the bioweapon death shot were brought to you by the same people. And we're talking about people like Fauci, Gates, Tedros, Dashik, etc.
How would that like mutations, like it's hard to predict, like 5 generations down the line, what could we be looking at? We have no clue, do we?
Well, you could argue we'll be looking at 5 generations down the line. One of the things I'm wrapping my head around now, and as you go through a war, you have to change your goals. My goals, when I try to warn everyone before anyone outside of clinical trials will inject it, my goal was to stop this, to just
Mhm.
stop this, and then go back to my job 6 months later and carry on with life. That didn't happen. My goals where we're at now, and I think we need everybody's help with this, is to protect in every way, mentally, spiritually, physically, protect against injections, at least a significant number of young people representing diverse backgrounds to ensure that we are able to have natural, non genetically modified humans to repopulate the earth. I think that's a very real possibility.
Part of that, I think, Dr. Trozzi, would require a pretty, and it's hard to get through the censorship, but a pretty powerful educational campaign about the shedding aspect of this because I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, but every medical doctor that I speak to that deals with patients with that knows about the vaccines, deals with the bioweapon injection victims, the shedding is real, but especially through intimate relationships. Like I've spoken to plenty of doctors. In fact, I know people with this personally, where one of them, the couple was vaccinated, and then the husband and wife, boyfriend or girlfriend, whatever, like the other person was unvaccinated, is going in the hospital with heart conditions all of a sudden. And these are people young in their 20s and 30s. So, um, like if you want to preserve the future generation, like they really need to know not to have intimate relationships with people that got the injection if they're gonna, because that will affect their offspring. And that's not, and I don't mean that in like not trying to stigmatize people who got the shots, because one of the reasons why I've been working so hard to try to stop this is because people with pre-existing, everybody's at risk because of the shedding, but people with pre-existing conditions, they're at the highest risk. And guess what? From the preliminary data on Dr. Vila's research, which is actually published in that paper, Zivjets et al., with the showing that most of the people have damaged immune systems, basically evade. So that's an aspect of it that I guess has to be delicately handled because the people that got the shots are at high risk if the shots continue to be distributed because of the shedding because they have a damaged immune system, but at the same time, so it's not meant to stigmatize them at all because there's but if you're a young person, not only should you need to make sure like your kids don't get any of these injections, but you need to make sure that you're not having an intimate relationship with someone that got the injection. And that's a hard, and that's something people need to know because after they fall in love, they're not going to listen. So
No, for sure not. For sure not. And I mean, I think that we didn't build the bioweapon, so we're figuring
am
it
I
out as
wrong
we
on any
go.
of that, by the way? Am I, do you,
Well, I don't think wrong, but I think that there's some elements we don't know. So for
Mhm.
instance, is there shedding of the spike protein? For sure. If you look at, I know multiple doctors who are treating injection victims on a regular basis. And if you look at the injection victims, most of them have an antibody to spike protein level that is off the scale. So the upper end of the scale would be 2,500. It's just greater than, like the machinery can't read it in the lab. How high is their antibodies against the spike protein? Off the scale, which reasonable to think that indicates they're making a lot of spike protein still. Their genetic modification is present and they're continuing to produce the toxin. When you look at some of the good doctors in that and nurses who are taking care of these people, so they're in frequent contact with these people, and you look at their level of antibody to the spike protein, you see levels, up above normal, but like 10 or 20, not greater than 2,500.
Mhm.
So the question is, I think there's many questions of degree of penetration. So for instance, if somebody took multiple injections and these 40 trillion or 30 trillion copies of genetic foreign material is delivered throughout their body. So the question is, how many of their cells actually end up taking it, and how many of their cells are modified temporarily or permanently to produce the toxins? And will those cells die off while the person's still alive, and potentially a person at some point be free of the thing? That's within the realm of possibility. Uh, on the other hand, if someone is shedding the spike protein and affecting others' health in their close, their family, their friends, their coworkers. But on the other hand, if there's actual transfection of that genetic material, and I don't think we have the proof one way or the other yet, at least I'm not aware of it. In other words, if I took the shot, are the people close to me getting spike protein exposure, or are they possibly receiving exosomes coming out of my system carrying messenger RNA and possibly this plasmid DNA to modify them too? We don't know. I think we hope not. And you point out something very important because nobody wants to stigmatize anybody,
No,
right?
no,
In
no.
fact, that's how this whole started. When we knew that the people taking these not really a vaccine bioweapon injections, we knew that they were the source of the variants. We knew that they had viral loads. We knew strangely that they were the thing that didn't naturally exist, was kind of asymptomatic spreaders of the virus. Whereas natural people, they get a virus and they're spreading it. They're coughing, they're sneezing, and when they're not,
Yeah,
it's
right.
dense. Um, so we were, it was horrific at that time that governments were saying, in Canada, like Trudeau was saying, like, you think you're going to get on a plane, you're going to get on a train without taking the vaccine and put others in danger. You're not, and like the demonization, the truckers, the beating people of the street, all the stuff that happened.
Yeah.
And here we are now saying, those of us who've been fighting to stop the injections, I personally have not received any of those injections, clearly. I've not given any of them, and I've never recommended them. I've warned every single person I could since the beginning. But now we face a situation where, well, the people that took the injections actually present a legitimate scientific danger to the uninjected. Uh, it's a horrific situation, but we do have to deal with reality, Joseph. I mean, and I
Yeah.
know you're adept at dealing with reality, however harsh it may be at this time in history.
Well, and again, one of the reasons it's dose dependent, like you said. I mean, we don't know how long the shedding and the spike protein really it could go on forever, but just not as intense as it's. I think it's clearly worse within a month of when someone got the shot. Because I'd have people in my office 2 weeks after they got the shot, and I felt it. It's like when someone has the flu and you're standing, you feel it, you know. But so that, but again, just people that got the injections, many of them have damaged immune systems, even if they're asymptomatic, which is an increased reason to protect these people because they're more vulnerable if we allow these shots to continue to be, put out there because of they're more at risk than the shedding than a healthy person who didn't get the shot. Does that make sense to people watching? So that's frightening. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but you're like a Renaissance man here. You're a musician, and I want to bust your chops about this open water swimmer thing. So what are you doing? Swimming in this freezing ocean in Canada, and then
In Canada,
you
wow.
fly down to the Caribbean to swim with the sharks? What's up with that?
Yeah, well, yeah. Unfortunately, right now I'm housed in Brampton, so other than making it to a pool, that's all I have right now. But generally, I love open water swimming. And the region, where this all started for me, Bancroft, one of the main reasons I lived there was to enjoy my outdoor activities, including open water swimming. And, just, well, I've had such beautiful experiences. I mean, some of the best experiences I've had swimming in the region there. We have loons, the famous bird that's on the Canadian $1 coin, a loon, and they make this beautiful song. They're big, gorgeous birds, and they're amazing swimmers. And a strange thing I found is often when I'd be out swimming in the lakes around Bancroft, you're in your front crawl, so you're kind of a little unaware of what's around you because you're very focused on your stroke and your breathing. And I'd stop and realize, oh my God, there's a loon like swimming with me. Like a loon would be 5, 6 feet away. They would swim with me. And on one occasion, after stopping and just hanging out in the middle of the lake with the loon, I went underwater and I started swimming underwater. And the loon swam past me under the water. And I'll tell you, anybody who's a good swimmer, if you want to get humbled, you just got to have a loon pass you underwater because it's the turtle being passed by the hare.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I love swimming. I love horses. I love the outdoors, camping,
Well,
canoeing, carpentry.
you haven't did real open water swimming until you do it in Florida, either with the gators or the sharks.
Y-
Then
Well,
you get, you know,
that was my
then you
disappointment. That was my disappointment when I had the opportunity to be with you, Dr. Villa, and others on the last two WCH Florida events. Is you have these beautiful lakes. And of course, as an open water swimmer, I'm ready to jump out of the car and throw in a bathing suit and jump in everywhere. And then you realize you better be able to swim fast, man. So
you got
that's
gators
probably
and
the
all those
hardest thing about
things.
Florida is letting the gators have the water.
Yeah, they win. They get the water. So just before we wrap up here entirely, I want you to kind of give us an idea moving forward where you see this going, because I think that yeah, politically everybody's a disappointment from RFK to Trump at this point. I think most people probably see that if you know that are have their eyes open. And where do you see this going? Because it seems like to me it's mass hypnosis in the way that it's like indirect form of hypnotic suggestion. Like we don't even talk about this. Meanwhile, most of us know people now that are getting sick, having health complications, which we know are the result of the shots. Like it's just too many people having kind of weird diseases and anything from cancer to POTS to heart issues. And then I think a lot of the people who aren't awake are not connecting the dots. I mean, I just where do you see this going? Because I just it's such a you're watching it and it's like watching the train go off the tracks and it's still going off the tracks and people are still pretending it's not, it's just very bizarre.
Yeah. Well, I think, maybe in some ways we're almost at a bifurcation of human evolution because you have on the one hand, the last few years, for instance, has swept me into a completely different social and professional circle.
Hmm.
You know, I always got along with the doctors and nurses I worked with, but it wasn't like my best friends were doctors
Hmm.
or my social circle was doctors. Whereas strangely now, because the doctors, the psychologists, the nurses, the scientists, the lawyers, and activists around the world who really stood up and fought this, we've all become friends. We've all become connected. And so for the first time in my life, I have like hundreds of doctors who I love. You go to a conference and it's like running up and hugging
Yeah.
doctors. So there's some bright sides to this. The other thing is, and I want to talk about the dark side of it all too, but just to stay on the positive side of this, the result, for instance, the World Council for Health, we brought together, scientists from every continent, doctors from every continent, since 2021, and we've been meeting, and it's been these Renaissance type of thinkers who don't submit to agendas, who think and are smart, who saw through the propaganda early in the game, and so we've learned a lot about the bioweapon. We've learned a lot about COVID infections. We've learned a lot about virology, immunology, but we've learned a lot about everything. It like my perception of cancer now compared to 5 years ago is completely different. So on the one, what's strange is while most of us have been actually locked out of our universities, locked out of our hospitals, locked out of our clinics, locked out of our income, but strangely, we've been advancing medicine on a logarithm, like on an exponential scale. Um, so, so my ambition is that whether it's all of society, whether we actually have a restoration at a core level, what we'd like to see, for instance, from Trump and RFK, what I think we see from DeSantos and Dr. Latipo, in cases like that, you know, uh, we may have sort of a grand restoration. On the other hand, what you described is very true. there's a small percentage, but a growing and significant percentage. And I don't know if it's 3% or 50%. I suspect it's much higher than the dinosaur media would try to convince people because nobody's
Mhm.
really watching them. That people are smart, that people are alert, that people are taking care of their health, that there's lots of people that refuse the shot or are at least doing things to limit its damage and following the work we're doing. I think that our priority has to be as that group, and whether it's if it's only 3% of the world, that's still like 240 million people. I mean, that percentage of the world
Maybe
needs
they'll
to
give us
get,
Antarctica.
what's that?
Maybe they'll give us Antarctica or something. I don't know. We can go melt
Yeah,
the ice or
that would
something.
be nice. Climb over the ice shelf and see what's all around,
Yeah.
perhaps. But the I think we have to survive, number one. There's an old saying of Max Kahn, who's like a, Chinese philosopher, and he says, "He who defends must survive. He who attacks must vanquish." And that's not really meant as a completely passive statement for them that defend, because what that means, if someone keeps attacking, let's say in your neighborhood, let's say you got one person in the neighborhood who's kind of your Anthony Fauci, your Bill Gates, but just at the low street level. So they go around kicking in people's doors, beating people up, raping them, shooting them, robbing them. They have to go. They have to vanquish in order for you to live in peace. So we must survive. The perpetrators must vanquish. So I think right now there's efforts. For instance, your leadership on the bioweapons and terrorism laws, and bringing this thing down and getting around to where we should be, which is the perpetrators of these crimes who've now basically pooled amongst themselves 90+% of all wealth on the planet, 90% of all debt on the planet. That's all proceeds of crimes. So,
Right.
governments don't need to go into debt to take responsibility. They need to arrest the people that made the money and use that money to make the reparations. And I
Right.
think that's one of the obstacles is governments go, shit, even though we've got good people leading now, if we say that, yeah, this is a bioweapon and it killed people, we're going to bankrupt the government. No, arrest the perpetrators and seize their assets. That's key. On the other hand, this if this cabal continues to control a large portion of the population, continues to control the old world, increasingly illegitimate systems, we still have to survive. I think we have to hope that it actually deteriorates into something very dysfunctional, kind of what it is almost a modern Sodom and Gomorrah. And that at some point we rise out of the ashes and we're the future of the species on this planet. And that may be a 100-year plan. I don't know. We'll just keep
Yeah.
doing everything we can today.
Yeah, we didn't get into it, but that kind of leads into the whole transhumanism thing. But we'll leave that for another day.
That'd be
Dr.
nice.
Trozzi, you're the best. I said it to everybody. Doesn't mean it's not true. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. God bless you and everybody there in Florida. I mean, I'm glad you're pushing the envelope, but from where we stand, it's like, wow, there's hope in Florida more than everywhere else.
Well, you got to beat them over the head with a club if they don't do what you want. It's just that simple.
Keep doing it, Joseph. Thank you so much.
Thank you.